Hello and welcome to my assignment on the Bipeadalism debate, featuring my research assistants Annika and Frankie. Before we even get started, let's take a look at what even is bipedalism. Well, bipedalism is simply just the ability to walk on two legs. Before walking upright, our ancestors were tree-dwelling quadrupedal primates, which basically means that they lived in trees, and quadrupedal means that they were walking on all four legs and arms and not standing upright like the way we walk today. Now that we got the basic definition out of the way, today we're going to be looking at two different theories that hypothesize the origins of bipedalism in humans. So, my colleague Franklin recommended we look at the provisioning model hypothesis by Lovejoy. He created this in 1984. The main overview of Lovejoy's hypothesis is that he argued that early male hominins began walking upright so they could carry food back to females and offspring. This provisioning supposedly helped create pair bonding and reduce competition between males. Lovejoy is quoted saying regarding the beginning of bipedalism that a long period of readjustment of bones and muscles must have taken place over many generations to yield a descendant that walked with an efficient bipedal gait. During this period, a productive advantage must have fallen to those in each generation that walked more frequently in a bipedal posture despite their lack of efficiency. What Lovejoy here described perfectly was how bipedalism came to be and through the process of natural selection. The best traits and most useful traits that guarantee survival in a being will be passed on throughout, and the traits that are not optimal and not optimal for survival will essentially die out. So basically, bipedalism, the idea, the ability to walk on two legs, must have served some sort of purpose in order for it to be beneficial and for all of us to still be walking bipedal today instead of being quadrupeds. It essentially argues that being bipedal was good mating material because of the easier ability to carry things and bring back supplies to the mother and child. He says that a chimpanzee female, for example, must roam daily with her infant or child in search of sufficient nourishment. Because of this responsibility, she can care for only one offspring at a time. This limitation, in concert with the prolonged period during which the young dependent, 4 to 5 years, has made great apes a slowly producing group and relatively unsuccessful species. Essentially what this means is because the female chimpanzees have to take so much energy and time in raising their young and offsprings, they can only raise one at a time, which decreases the population rate, like the reproduction rate. And so being able to free up some time would be very beneficial and give the mother less stress and less strenuous tasks on her, so she could potentially raise more than one or raise them more quick and stuff, and just create a better environment for that offspring. Lovejoy also says that normally males devote much of their energy to and relationships with other males. The more dominant their status, the greater their chances of successfully consorting with females that enter estrus, which is ovulation. But in a species like the chimpanzees, such opportunities become rarer and reproductive process becomes more prolonged. Eventually, a point is reached when selection favors some additional behavior on the male's part that contributes to the survival of his few offsprings. To explain more simply, Lovejoy said that with food supply enhanced by provisioning, the female has more energy available for parenting, and therein lies the ultimate advantage of provisioning. Now, it makes sense that provisioning would be very useful to the female and make the male more desirable and attractive and want to be a good partner, but why is walking bipedal necessary here? Well, Lovejoy says that in order to carry a significant amount of the food items that constitute the diets for higher primates, our male ancestors would have had to have walked bipedally. Second, those that use the crudest devices to improve their carrying ability, like a broadleaf or animal skin, would have strongly been favored, and regular tool using would have emerged, which definitely was helping because the hands were freed up by being bipedal instead of quadrupeds. Now that we have looked at Frank's proposition of Lovejoy's hypothesis, we will move on to my other research colleague Annika's research that she found. But first, let's look at how we even discovered this article in the first place. Well, we went to the Western Library website. We searched in keywords. Keywords can be anything like bipedalism, the origins, any kinds of theories that you know about. So far, we have learned about the savanna hypothesis or the killer ape hypothesis for bipedalism. You could really look up any hypothesis. Just look up bipedalism hypothesis on Google and just do a little bit of research, and you can just enter in any of those keywords. After, you can go over to a bunch of filters. These will definitely help refine your search and narrow down exactly what you need. Now, normally after going down to filters, you would set it from 2001 to 2026 so that your research is relatively recent. However, I did not realize that the article I found was from 1996 and that my publication date had reverted to 1901. Therefore, that is a mistake that is totally on my part. However, when you are doing this research, hypothetically, you would set the publication date from 2001 to 2026. Then we would activate the filter of peer-reviewed journals. And I went over and I found an article that was called The Postural Feeding Hypothesis, an ecological model for the evolution of bipedalism. I thought this was perfect because it seemed to just talk about one hypothesis, the postural feeding hypothesis, and it was relatively recent. Therefore, I thought it was perfect to talk about. Regardless, the show must go on, and we will look at the postural feeding hypothesis from Kevin Hunt that was recommended to us by my colleague, Annika. Now, Kevin Hunt's idea was that bipedalism first developed in trees, not on the ground. Early hominids stood upright on branches to reach fruit while feeding. He claims that field research has shown that chimpanzees are bipedal most often when they feed on the small amounts of fruit in forest trees. They feed from such trees either by reaching up to pick up fruits while standing on the ground or by balancing on branches in trees, stabilizing themselves by grasping an overhead branch in semi-hanging pose. Hominid bipedalism may have originated as feeding a posture with arboreal arm-hanging bipedalism, and vertical climbing as vital gathering modes. That was only later refined into an efficient locomotor adaptation. So he claims that originally we are bipedal in order to have a feeding posture. So our posture was used to eat and gather food, and we would be hanging from branches. And then only later it became used for locomotion and just walking around on 2 feet. Kevin Hunt used chimpanzees and Australopithecine anatomy and evidence from them, an early group, to support his basis. He said that the article concentrates on evidence that favors a narrow group of ecologically based hypotheses reconcilable with a postural feeding hypothesis that conforms best with chimpanzee behavior and an Australopithecine anatomy. Watched chimpanzees for many hours and recorded what they were doing every 2 minutes. Also studied baboons for comparison. The researchers focused on how the animals moved and positioned their bodies. So what the animal was doing at the time, like feeding, resting, or more, the size and angle of branches, how high the animals climbed, and what the style of climbing they used. Data more reliable, repeated observations of the same movements were grouped together into one movement period. Hunt has further evidence for this hypothesis when he states, "These features are poor adaptations to walking upright, but are wholly consistent with bipedal posturing and gathering, both in trees and on the ground." He also claims that Australopithecine anatomy, taken as a whole, suggests that arm-hanging bipedalism in trees was a common activity, as was the upright gathering of food on the ground. Bipedalism on the ground allows an individual to reach food items higher in the tree and use both hands for gathering. Arboreal semi-bipedal and pre-proto-hominids confronted with a more open forest may have found bipedal feeding and bipedal shuffling the more energy-efficient terrestrial traditional behavior, leading gradually to more committed bipedalism as they became terrestrial. Now it's time for me to look at my colleagues' pickings, and let's see what has potentially biased Hunt and Lovejoy. So we'll start with Lovejoy. Heavily biased by the idea that males are providers, female are dependent caregivers, and of the nuclear style relationships, especially with monogamy and male responsibility. Essentially, this is problematic because it projects modern human gender roles onto early hominids without enough evidence and support to back it up. Hunt had a primatology bias, as he relied heavily on observing modern chimpanzees and assumed their behavior could model early hominids. Living chimpanzees are not even direct ancestors of humans. He also focused strongly on the forest and tree environments, but he underestimated the importance of the ground movement in later evolution and how that came to be. It definitely does not explain how bipedalism later became efficient on the ground, because he mostly focused on trees, essentially. Along with the potential biases that were inflicted on our authors, there was also some credible evidence that supports them. Lovejoy, there's evidence for walking upright because it frees the hands for carrying food or infants, just as he said. Some fossil evidence also suggests that reduced canine tooth size in early hominins, which may indicate less male competition and more cooperation, that efficient walking could help transport resources long distance. Now, there's also credible evidence that supports hunt. Modern chimpanzees often stand upright in trees while reaching for food, as he said. Fossils like Australopithecus show adaptations for both climbing and walking, and early hominids still had curved fingers and shoulder features suited for climbing. Bipedal posture in trees may have existed before full-time ground walking as well. I'd like to do a very simple overview and comparison of Lovejoy and Hunt's hypothesis. Lovejoy's provisioning hypothesis focuses on social behavior and food carrying, while Hunt's postural feeding hypothesis focuses on feeding posture and arboreal movement. Lovejoy's theory has been criticized for gender and cultural bias, whereas Hunt's theory is considered more behaviorally based because it relies on observation of chimpanzees. I personally don't really fully believe in either of these hypotheses. I believe that bipedalism and the evolution of bipedalism cannot be reduced to just one factor. Evolution is likely due to a bunch of reasons, not just feeding or mating. Now, I do believe that Lovejoy's views are likely social-wise, especially studying social and cultural anthropology. I noticed, it definitely aligns with behaviors that are very possible. Hunt's views are, in my opinion, very likely at the very beginning of the evolution of bipedalism, but it definitely doesn't explain it all. So I would view that as an incomplete explanation instead of a supporting explanation instead of the explanation. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video on the bipedalism debate.